Hi, everybody. Steve Ettlinger here. I'm at Ossam Gallery in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Janie Samuels and I won a prize last year at a group show, the prize of which was 2 weeks at the gallery here. She did the paintings, I did the sculpture, which you can see here now. I've got 16 pieces here. There were 17, I sold one. And they are in a range of styles, which I'll explain shortly.
I'd like to introduce you to Steve Ettlinger for those of you that are not familiar with him. This is his work. And Steve, I'd like to hear now from you, if you could just give me a little bit of a background as to how you started making this work and if you studied art in the past and so forth.
Okay. Well, I did not study art, but I grew up in a household filled with art and art lovers. My mother took up painting after a long hiatus of childbearing and the like, and painted. This is in the suburb of Chicago. One day she was very self-effacing. She won a prize in a contest in the suburbs, and the prize was all the winners, many winners, had pictures displayed at the Art Institute of Chicago. So I feel like I'm following in her footsteps, although it's not quite the Art Institute of Chicago, but I won a prize and I got a show. And my father was an inventor. We went to art galleries a lot, but I grew up loving, in particular, abstract expressionist art and photography. My career started really with photography, both a little bit in college and a couple years out of college. I worked for a photo agency, Magnum Photos, worked with top photojournalists. I went to work for Geo magazine as a picture editor. So I was really oriented towards photography. But when that ended, I started doing books. I became an author and a book producer. And all my books had a visual element, sort of gifty books. So I've always been visually oriented, but I never stopped loving abstract art, especially abstract sculpture. I discovered recently, as an aside, that I took pictures of abstract sculpture by Brancusi years ago. I hadn't realized how much I liked Brancusi. Now, that brings me to this. So I have a place up in Maine. We had to have a couple of trees taken down, and I have a neighbor with 12 chainsaws and another neighbor who cuts down trees and has a sawmill. So I was oriented towards chainsaws, Brancusi, and a lot of spruce trees on the ground. I went and did this with the cheapest electric chainsaw I could get at Home Depot, and I was so pleased with the result that I looked it up on the web, and I found it has exact dimensions of the endless column by Brancusi that is in the Museum of Modern Art. And I go, this could be fun. So I have cut a lot of, in 2013, 14, 15, I cut a lot of spruce, because there's tons of it up there in Maine. It's like weeds. And a lot of angular pieces. Since then, I've used cedar, which is a different feel and a different effect. But let me go over here to one of several here that I have that are very angular. This one is actually my most recent. And these are two logs that look just like this. A logger up in Maine had them in the ditch. He said, here, just take them. I was looking for some cedar. And they both look pretty crappy. But when I started sanding this one on the right, I went, my gosh, the wood is still beautiful. I love the contrast. And then I saw a piece at the Brooklyn Museum Permanent Collection by that really got me going on contrast and tension and so forth. So I thought this was the best way to go.
So you created the cracks during that wood, or do those come naturally? And where in the part where it's so vibrant?
These are all natural. They're called checks.
That's crazy.
And what happens is, because the log is round, as it dries out, the surface dries out faster than the inside, so it cracks on the outside. And some of my pieces have a deep one. You can't see on this one. Oh, maybe you can't hear. This one I didn't fill, but quite often I fill them with epoxy, which you'll see in some of my other pieces. And the cedar, I like the smoothness of the cedar, but in this case I left it raw. And by the way, if you see here, I only took off about just a couple millimeters to get to this beautiful light-colored wood. And then I sand like mad to make it super smooth, which cedar responds to very nicely. But I like angles, and so we're going to go over here. to a piece that this is the third in a series. Series sounds too important. I had failed experiments. I wanted to cut with angles, but using the chainsaw or other power tools. This is spruce, and I found it was very difficult to use the chainsaw to cut an angle because you can't.
So that's all one piece?
That's all one piece. It's a very heavy spruce. There you go. But I'm very impressed by this skyscraper in Tribeca. And
Oh, I know that piece.
Yeah,
That's such a
Leonard
great,
Street.
it's a beautiful building.
Yes. And I also was inspired, unfortunately, by Frank Gehry, who I should say unfortunately, because I got to know his work, especially when he was tapped to design stuff for the Barclays Arena, which he ultimately did not do. Anyway, I like the Frank Gehry stack cubes, and I make a lot of sketches when I go to political meetings. I make sketches while I'm, doodles really, but I've been fascinated by this variety of angles. It was very hard to do technically, and I varnished this, which is, I don't want to do again, it's too much work. The varnish takes so long to dry, it gets dusty, and you have to start over.
So you find after you varnish, if it gets dusty, you then have to go back in and sand again to get the dust out?
Yeah.
What do you do?
That's why, also, a lot of times for varnish, the best way to make it work is to have 4 or 5 coats. I've had some varnish with 7 coats. And it's one thing if you want to do a coat every 20 minutes, but some varnish you have to wait 24 hours. And that means you're spending a week putting varnish on something.
Right.
So I don't want to do more varnish. Okay. And we're going to look at a big one over here.
All right, I follow you.
This is triple arcs. I should stay here. This is triple arcs, 1 and 2. Again, there's a little tension between 2 shapes. And this is cedar. This is the first one that I'm showing. This is cedar that I cut down in 2017. I cut down 3 trees in somebody and got about 9 pieces out of it, 6, 7, 8 feet long, some of which I rented a U-Haul trailer for and brought back to Brooklyn to sand and cut and so forth. I work in a workshop. I rent by the hour when I have something big on 8th Street in Gowanus. It's set up with all the top professional tools used mostly by professional cabinet makers who are using exotic woods and doing fine joinery. It's really funny. I walk in with logs and a chainsaw. They seem to really enjoy my work there. I certainly learn a lot from them.
Had you envisioned these 2 pieces being exhibited together when you were making them?
Yes,
or
I wanted them to be paired, both for the tension and for the shape, like the prayer hands, if you will.
Is that so? That's what you think of when you look at them? Is it their prayer hands?
Sort of, yeah. There's less tension and
Oh, I see that, especially on this side.
more togetherness. And also, you can see here a big check. They call it a check, a big split. This one I filled with sawdust and glue, which is what a lot of woodworkers use. It doesn't look as good as the epoxy, which is now why I now use epoxy. And I know how to do some of this stuff because I've renovated a bunch of old buildings in Brooklyn and Maine. A bunch sounds pretentious, but fixing up old houses like the one I live in. And also, I love boat building. Not that I've ever built a boat, but I've done boat repair. And so the epoxy I use is marine epoxy, and the varnish I've used is marine varnish. These could sit outside, I suppose. They're sitting on steel bases with a spike about 1 foot high that goes up a hole in the middle of them. So these could be outside or in your living room, in case you were wondering.
Do you have any work now that stays outside on a regular basis?
In the summer, I put the Brancusi endless column outside. It's treated with Thompson's water seal, kind of thing you might put on outdoor furniture.
How often do you need to treat it?
Oh, every year or 2. But anything left out in the winter is going to suffer. I sold a piece to a couple who have a beautiful location on the coast of Maine, who wanted the piece to be outside all year round. And I told them it's like a wooden boat. They're going to have to probably sand and varnish every year or so. But also, I spent about 3 weeks treating it like a wooden boat with, I think 12 coats of varnish, very thin. And before that, boiled linseed oil, raw linseed oil, all kinds of things that boat builders call boat soup to make it resistant to
How did you determine how to use those materials to protect it?
I
Through
talked
research?
to some wooden boat builders who were neighbors in Maine, and some artists who work in wood. What's interesting is you can let wood degrade and it might take a long time. That's what a lot of chainsaw artists do. Or they just throw varnish on it. It's called spar varnish, which is what you use because it resists UV light from sunlight and mildew. So now we're going to go look at some softer ones. These are made of cedar. I love this one. It's so smooth. And in this particular section, I like because it's a very gentle indentation. These are a little sharper, but I could feel this for a long time. It's like in a soft. This check is filled with epoxy, and it's sanded smooth. You can't really feel it. And the grain in the cedar, again, this is from a tree that I helped cut down. The grain, I think, is fabulous when it's exposed at an angle. And here at the bottom, you see it's lighter. That's just the outer surface of the tree.
Oh, interesting.
It's just a different color of that level of bark.
Do you photograph the trees? Do you have a record before you start working on them?
Not good enough. The ones I cut down, I should have photographed. I have a photograph of a few of my helpers smiling with victory when I loaded the pieces in this little trailer. It was sort of a group effort. And others have been just like a neighbor in Maine will drop it off, like, when they have an extra piece of spruce, they'll just drop it off and I'll find it there. This one, I call Big Fish. And I don't like representational art, but this top, which is flat on one side and curved on another, is typical of a lot of fish faces, if you will. And then there's sort of a fish tail at the bottom. But otherwise, I just want to suggest it. I'm enamored of Brancusi's fish, which inspired me to do one called, actually, we can go look at it. His fish is a lot bigger and a lot nicer. This is also really smooth to touch. It feels really good. And but it's a way to showcase the grain, actually. But there's a mere suggestion of a fish. And this also has a check on the back, which I filled. And wood will absorb humidity and respond to temperature changes. So eventually you can feel that filling. But when I made it, it was so smooth you couldn't feel. Anyway, I like the natural aspects of it. While I'm here, I'll show you this guy called a shmoo from Lil Abner. But I made it just because I like the smoothness and it's just fun to feel. But, of course, anybody will look at it and it's art, so they can say, oh, it looks like a fish or it looks like something, I don't know. This is flat, which is meant to be just the bottom, but the grain is so beautiful. And again, you can see the different colors of the levels. Look how dark it is here. Towards the center, very dark, with the center of the grain, and very light as you get near the exterior. And here's a little discoloration. In wood, this discoloration comes from minerals that the tree has soaked up from the ground. So you never know what it's really going to look like. By the way, you may notice, a lot of these say, please touch. That's because it's just so much fun to touch that smoothness. Over here's another smooth one. This one I don't ever plan on selling, and it's living at the foot of my bed. It's suggestive of a feather. I didn't quite curve it enough to look like a feather, but this curve here I love. And I was trying to learn about proportion. An artist friend said, I need to learn proportion. So this follows, it sounds fancier than it really is, the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is a mathematical formula where you add up the prior two numbers to get the third number. So the first two are 1 and 2, the next number is 3. Then you could add 3 and 2 and get 5, and then you can get 3 and 5 and get 8. That's the sequence. But in this case, it's 3, 2, and 1. 3 here, 2 here, 1 here. And most of mine now, I leave the base sort of raw. I like the natural base. You can see a check here that I filled with epoxy, and likewise here and here. And it's sanded super smooth. And because of the going into the center, you expose the grain. And the grain is closer at the outside, farther apart if you go on a slight angle here. So I don't consider myself a woodworker, but I'm learning wood, and those professionals who I've rubbed shoulders with at the workshop have always said, you'll learn wood as you work with it. And it's true. I don't want to be one of those guys who gets an exact piece of wood just to bring out the grain. I just like cedar, which I'm hunting for more of. It's sort of hard to find. But I realized, oh my gosh, if I cut it more of an angle, I can expose more grain. So it's kind of cool.
It's very cool.
And then there's another soft one here. This one is my most recent piece. And I absolutely love it. This is also 3, that's 3 feet, this is 2 feet, that's 1 foot. That's my lame attempt at really good proportion. I didn't study art in school, but my guess is if you go to an art class, they'll tell you something about the Greeks and proportion and whatnot. This I did these curves deliberately so you could see the grain on an angle. And then because I sanded very little off the original tree here, you get that very light outside layer of wood. It's not colored, it's the way the tree looks. I filled this check with epoxy. It sort of made me mad. I had the tree in a barn for 3 years, thinking it would dry out. It was coated with polyurethane, so it would dry out slowly. The ends were coated with a special wax that keeps the boards and logs from drying out too fast. So it took time, effort. It was like 6 or 8 pieces of logs I did it with, and they all cracked anyway.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But it's not cracking too much anymore. This winter, this was in my office, and in the middle of, I think I was in a Zoom session, I heard bang like that, and it had split a little bit more, and another piece had split. But I can't see, just a little hairline crack, but it made a huge sound. It's perched on, unlike anything else, it has no natural base. It's perched on a spike, which I like, and sort of suspended. I want to do more like this. So stand by. I'm going to do it.
Will do. We're at 17 minutes, just so you know.
Okay. Well, over here are the last 2 I want to show. They're both from reclaimed beams from a building in the corner of Flatbush Avenue and Bergen Street, so it's locally sourced. The owners of the building, the Pinchik family, sold or rented the building to TD Bank, which replaced all the wooden beams with steel, and they had, in a vacant lot nearby, they had all these 24-foot beams they sold to architects. I picked up some small pieces. I paid for it by the foot. The one on the left, I wanted to try a figure, and that's scaled up from a publicity photo of Mae West. It exactly matches her proportions in the photo. I call it Mae East. And the one on the right, the serendipity that there was this tongue, really, of another piece of wood at the top, and I call it I-beam, and I absolutely love this. This is very old wood, and this is actually dirty and dark, but on the sides it's sanded glass smooth, and I'm told it's southern yellow pine that's obviously well over 100 years old. And there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this tour, and I've really enjoyed having this show.
It's been a pleasure. Now, do you have a sense of where you're going in the future? Is it, as you'd stated, is it this last piece over here, or?
I'm definitely getting confused. I really want to do big ones like that curved one with the curves.
Uh-huh.
And I've sold a few little pieces, and several people said, oh, you ought to do more little pieces. They're cool, and you can sell them. And I'm like, I don't know. And yet I have little pieces of cedar because when I cut into the big log, I have this really nice wood, and it's, so I'm going to go both ways.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking your time, Steve.
Thank you.